There were incredible police inconsistencies during the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Did those inconsistencies contribute to the assassination attempt on President Trump's life? Information war correspondent, host of Steel News, and friend of the show, journalist Ann Vandersteel, has uncovered some remarkable new details and new information and joins us now this morning as she's been digging through all of these pieces of information as they're coming in fast and furiously. Ann, thanks for taking a few moments out to talk with us today.
Great to be with you, Clayton. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's talk about some of the new information that you've uncovered about what went on in Butler, Pennsylvania. Can you just walk us through how you discovered some of these inconsistencies from the police and the agencies that were there that day?
Sure. There's a couple of things we really need to examine closely, and this comes from a source inside the Pennsylvania State Police Department who is concerned and has questions. And these are questions that need to be raised extensively within the Secret Service and within all the agencies that were present for law enforcement that day. But most concerningly is with the Secret Service running point on the Trump rally that day, why was it staffed in the fashion that it was? First off, the Pennsylvania State Police, which has been a party to many presidential escorts, was woefully understaffed, specifically when it comes to their elite squad, the Strategic Emergency Response Team, or the CERT team. That is their elite squad. And there was only 4 members of the CERT team requested in attendance that day. And they were delegated out to the motorcade as opposed to being on the inner perimeter with the Secret Service. So why was that such a sparse request? Number 2, the bomb squad was denied participation. There was no request, even though it was made available. Again, they are always available on these sorts of gatherings. When you have a president, former or current president, you always have a bomb squad available. So these are 2 big glaring questions that need to be answered. The CERT team normally works with Secret Service very, very closely, hand in hand. In fact, I mean, they're looking at the rooftops, they're looking at areas for breaches of security, they're looking at any possible breach point, frankly, and they will recommend and put snipers on multiple breach points or points of access or a place where they feel that anybody might gain access that shouldn't gain access. So you have to ask yourself, why wasn't that engaged for that particular day? We all saw that it took, 3 minutes 42 seconds before any return fire was offered. It has also been stated by Dan Bongino that the protocol that day was do not fire unless fired upon. Now, in any given circumstances in the past, the CERT team, if they see somebody within a presidential motorcade or in a presidential gathering, if you see somebody with a long arm, they're going to take the shot. There's going to be shoot and ask questions later. That was a stand down. So there's major questions around that. But I think probably one of the most alarming things, in addition to all of that, was the lack of communications, interagency communications. And I can explain if you're interested.
Yeah, please do explain. I mean, and you bring up a great point here about this, the return fire. I just spoke to a special operations sniper who was in charge of, who was, spent 17 years as an elite sniper, but part of a group that would protect presidents, prime ministers. There's absolutely no way they wouldn't have returned fire. In fact, they would have fired first. So this is a glaring problem in this story.
Correct. You really didn't see anybody besides Secret Service around. And again, we could talk about the JV squad that was around the president that day, as evidenced by the videos. I mean, again, the DEI hires, and I am not a feminist, I'm not anti-woman, I'm not pro-woman, I'm pro the best person for the job in any given circumstance, whatever creed, color, religion you are, I don't care. But you always want the best person, especially around a presidential candidate and former president, in a situation where the hostility and the rhetoric towards President Trump by the establishment, I don't just mean the left, I mean the establishment, including rhinos, is at an all-time deafening high, almost like a deep state death rattle, as they know they're losing in the court of public opinion, clearly. But interagency communication is critical. Now imagine playing telephone, Clayton, right? If you have a string of people
Right.
and somebody starts a message and passes it in the ear to the next person and so on and so forth. That is ostensibly what was happening that day during the Trump rally. Typically, you have a local county controller who assigns a channel on your radios for your state, your federal, and your local agencies that are present. When the federal government is involved, specifically the Secret Service, they have their own channel. So while the local, state, and federal agencies may share and coalesce around a channel, the feds are always on their separate channel. So that is, of course, problematic in of itself. But typically you have somebody in the middle that's relaying information so that in real time, they're sharing information as quickly as possible. Something happened that day because you could see the mass confusion, particularly when they were trying to get the president off. Again, you had a JV squad of Secret Service agents who couldn't even holster their gun properly in a timely fashion. They looked like it was sort of who's on first, Abbott and Costello routine, just trying to get the president into the car, save a couple of Secret Service agents that I've seen in detail around President Trump for a long time. But again, the interagency communication appeared not to have been there. And if it was there, it wasn't functioning properly. So when setting up interagency communications, according to my source, radio should be handed out. And frankly, the question is, why not standardize on a standard radio channel for everybody? The Secret Service can have their own private comms, but there should be radios issued to everybody so that at least they can communicate collaboratively all across the same channel so as to expedite information as well as a response should something like what we witnessed happen ever occur in the future. So, again, we have to ask, I think Freedom of Information Act requests need to go out to all law enforcement agencies involved, to the Secret Service, to DHS, for which Alejandro Mayorkas is over, DHS, which is over Secret Service. And Clayton, you and I have spoken about Operation Burning Edge and the work that's been going on as we've evaluated the people transiting our southern border, the illegal invasion happening, and all of the state sponsors of terror that are sending military-age men across the border. It is no surprise that Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, has been under the microscope, so much so by Operation Burning Edge. They've locked their Twitter account. They removed signs down in the Panamanian-Darien Gap. But they're also integral in this invasion process and expediting the mass weaponized human migration. Alejandro Mayorkas is a former board member of HIAS just before taking on the position of the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. And to cap all of this, most recently, the election of President Jose Raul Mulino, the new president of Panama, summoned a delegation from the United States government, and Joe Biden sent Alejandro Mayorkas. And in that meeting, I'm told by Oscar Ramirez, one of our Operation Burning Edge correspondents who also works for Real America's Voice and Epoch Times, he learned definitively that Mulino said to Mayorkas, "You will provide us finances and planes to repatriate these illegals. You will help facilitate the closure of the Darien Gap. And if you don't, we will restrict access to the Panama Canal for the United States." Very problematic.
You also just broke some news just a few minutes ago about the continuity of government and why the Biden administration, they come out, President Biden makes this recorded statement, says we need to unite as a country, no place for violence. We need to come together and settle these things at the battle box. Which is strange to me. It was a recorded message, and yet they still couldn't get it right, not at the ballot box. But this continuity of government piece that dropped just a short time ago, the Biden administration appears to be going into a war footing right now. The deep state appears to, now that they couldn't take out President Trump, now we have this case dismissed, of course, against Jack Smith as unconstitutional, the documents case against President Trump. You believe that they are heading into a war footing. Can you explain that?
Well, I came to that, my assessment myself, and I actually sent this in a text to a well-respected general who I won't put on blast, but he concurred that this is a declaration of war by his reading of this memo. And, when you consider where we are going, we just did a broadcast yesterday with Lara Logan and Alex Jones. It was about a 2.5-hour broadcast, along with some other very influential podcasters. And we talked about this and broke it down. And Alex Jones was very clear. He said, "Ann, this is where they're going. They missed their attempt at assassinating President Trump. We can look at, like you just said, all the Supreme Court cases, including the Fisher case, the immunity case, the Chevron doctrine, which is really going to be dismantling the deep state en masse, and the administrative state, I should say. You can look at all that, and running up to today, the losses are piling up for them right now. And, if you look at the international banking cabal that's behind all of this war posturing and, of course, nation building after we destroy countries. We are at war with BRICS nations, not because the Americans choose to be, but because the international banking cabal controlling our government chooses to be. So again, this is nothing more than continuity of government as orchestrated by an unelected group of bureaucrats that are going to consolidate power under agency, which, of course, by our own Constitution, Clayton, is illegal and unconstitutional, unlawful. We cannot have agency government. We must have a government of, by, and for the people we elected and choose to govern us based on what we, the people, want. So we are going into a position that if the American people tacitly agree to this memorandum and just go along to get along because they don't understand what's happening, well, we're giving away our authority to a bunch of war criminals. And that's exactly who is running our country right now.
Given that, do you think that this shooter acted alone, that this was a lone wolf?
No,
as Laura Logan points out, it takes quite a village to create a lone wolf, doesn't it?
It does take quite a village. I mean, we can go back in history and look at the lone wolf shooters, right? Of course, the JFK assassination comes to mind, but we now know that was a CIA operation. So again, this reeks of another CIA operation. CIA perfected the color revolution occasionally outside our United States. We've gone into color revolutions and replaced power regimes left and right, Ukraine being the most recent. Fortunately, they're losing that game. We see the election of Javier Milei in Argentina, a libertarian in a socialist country, Bukele in El Salvador, and of course, the new Costa Rican president, the president of Panama. These are people that are now rejecting tyranny, and it's because the people are standing up. It's always been the people's power. God has always given us discernment to make those choices. But what we, as Americans, we've been allowed to live a life of luxury for a long time, thanks to the central bankers and the hegemony of the US dollar. That is fading very quickly into the proverbial sunset. And the sooner that Americans realize that we're going into an economic collapse, that is when I finally believe we will see the spirit of the American rise again. And I don't mean the word revolution as in calls to arms. I mean, we are going to reject tyranny like we did 250 years ago. But this time we can do it peacefully because information is power. And as quickly as you can put these broadcasts out, Clayton, that's the speed of which we can educate America and come together and position ourselves to restore the republic. And I do believe that is where we're headed, but it's going to be a very ugly restoration process. And again, the ugliness in the making will all be from the left and the rhino establishment because they are losing power and losing power quickly. So I'm actually looking forward to the transition to myself.
I as well. And you and I are, of course, big, investors in gold and silver and precious metals, and gold prices bouncing back this morning. I think, there's an awareness about what's happening with the US dollar. It is beautiful. It is beautiful. I'll get you out of here on this, Ann, which is what questions do you still have about this shooter and what unfolded in Butler, Pennsylvania? What answers do you hope we get over the next few days? Now, the FBI, Christopher Wray, says, we got this. We're in charge. We're going to get to the bottom of this investigation. But what answers stand out to you most glaringly right now that you need?
Well, as you always know, when we're talking about something over here, it's because they don't want us looking over there. So while we sit here and machinate over the fact that we can be rest assured there is more than one shooter involved, who that is specifically, I don't know. But I believe without a shadow of a doubt, our deep state government is involved. There may be foreign actors that are involved as well. It could be, it could be bad actors coming out of Iran who are collaborating with our bad actors out of the CIA. I don't know for sure. That all will eventually come to the surface. But while we are studying all of that, we have to pay attention to what's happening economically in our amidst immediately, because they're going to continue the destabilization on our country. We're going to see the destabilization of civil unrest in our cities. And again, I want to remind you of just something. You brought up gold very quickly. We're about to go over $35 trillion in debt. The interest payment alone is $800 million, which is greater than our defense budget. So you can see they're positioning America right now as a very weakened, downed eagle with a broken wing. And I think the American people are going to be the ones to set that splint and get our eagle flying again. But in the meantime, we can be fascinated with how many shooters. But at the end of the day, it's not going to stop what is happening to our country. Only the people can stop it. So I say we should get to the bottom of it to, again, get one more piece of accountability and evidence to hold these sick, evil perpetrators to account. And we will do that. But in the meantime, we have to be prepared for what's coming so that we can brace for that impact and suffer as few casualties as possible under the circumstances that are literally coming at us like a train off the rails.
Well said. Ann Vandersteel is the host of Steel News, an excellent journalist. Thank you for everything that you've been doing to get this information out and continued great work. We really appreciate it, Ann. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks, Clayton, to you and Natali as well.